Blizzards and heavy snowfalls during the winter of 1937, coupled with an early spring, created unusual flooding conditions on the Little Fork River. 30 million board feet of pine and 30,000 cords of pulpwood joined the river current, racing toward the Net River Bridge. A quickly formed skeleton crew struggled desperately to hold these runaway logs by stretching restraining booms across the river. After more than 20 of these booms washed out, they got one to hold. It caused a gigantic log jam, which created further backwater flooding, diverted floating logs and pulpwood over the banks and into the woods. Every saw log and every stick of pulpwood had to be put back in the river and sent on its way to the mills.
As the water receded, the crew was gathered to carry on the work of getting the drive the rest of the way down the river. The rear or sacking crew was the first to go to work. It was the bank rats, pushing and prying with peavies and canthooks, who were responsible for returning the logs to the river. Thick mud remaining from the flood prevented the use of caterpillars, and all work was done by hand, taking as many as 7 or 8 men to move one log. They kidded each other about never before having been on a drive where they had to climb trees to retrieve a log. The crew was always split, with one half on each side of the river. The men on the opposite side were referred to as being on the Canadian side, even when they were not in Canada. As logs reached the river's edge, the drivers moved them out into the water. Many drivers were skilled at walking about on floating logs, but it was also important to be good at wading waist deep in cold, fast water. Maintaining a good footing while moving big saw logs could be very precarious. One great old-time Minnesota lumberjack once said he had just as much respect for the good wader as he did for someone who was catty on floating logs, especially when the water was ice cold. Once the logs were in the river, it seemed to require as much work keeping them on the move as it did getting them into the water. Hanging up on rocks, bouncing into each other, the logs continually formed small jams. Placing themselves in physical danger, the white water men worked while balancing on twisting, bobbing logs. To earn the distinction of being called a white water man, one was supposed to be able to ride a log when it broke off the wing jam through the rapids and down to the still water below. Along with the men and the river came the wanigans, carrying everything from beds to bacon. The cook camp wanigan was nothing more than a big scow with a shack on top. Other wanigans provided supplies, and on this drive, huge tents were pitched on a raft providing shelter for as many as 30 men on double-decked bunks. Keeping ahead of the wanigans, members of the crew headed toward the next rapids to form wing jams which would narrow and deepen the channel to permit passage of the boxy wanigans. They could hear the roar even before they reached the bend. When the haystack waves came into sight, muscles tensed and a man's heartbeat raced as he entered the rapids. In spite of the huge sweep oars for steering, there was little anyone could do except to let the wanigans find their own way. There would be wet sleeping that night. On this drive, the sleeping wanigans had not been built buoyant enough to support all the men, forcing the last to bed at night and the first to rise in the morning to wade through 4 inches of icy water to get to and from their bunks. Even with care given to preparing the rapids for the cook camp wanigan to pass through, they bumped over the rapids like old tubs. When a good landing place was located, the signal was given, and preparations began to moor the wanigan for the evening. The task of tying up to shore always involved a struggle with the steering oars, requiring heavy effort with pike poles to clear a way through the floating timber so the steering oars could be manipulated. Only one steering oar was needed in slow water, but in fast water, 4 men on 2 oars were required to keep from piling up on wing jams or going aground. The evening mooring brought all 5 wanigans together. Gangplanks were put out and campfires prepared. A good cook in a lumber camp did more to attract a crew and keep them working than anything or anyone else. The cook, Harry Falls, was assisted by his cookees and a bull cook who chopped wood and kept the wanigans clean. Logging had gone union the winter before, and the 8-hour day ended with the blow of a whistle. Dinner was served cafeteria style by boarding one end of the wanigan over the gangplank, walking through, picking up food, then off the other end to find a desirable place to sit. The working conditions were endured as long as food was good and plentiful. Ham and bacon were the only meats available, as there was no refrigeration. If they were fortunate enough to have a chicken farm nearby, the clerk would purchase fresh eggs. On one occasion, 700 dozen eggs were purchased. They lasted only a couple of weeks. Sitting on the banks were legends from the woods: Gunnysack Pete, Dangler Jones, and Tamarack Joe. Tamarack loved dill pickles and had a reputation far and wide for being able to swear vehemently without ever using a curse word. Johnny Mayer was one of the best whitewater men on the river. This elite group, the Whitewater Men, always had a private campfire, and they wore fringes in their shoes that were the symbol of the experienced riverman. Balancing with a pike pole, the Whitewater Men did solo log rolling to entertain the bank rats.
Logs always want to turn and twist, and it's difficult to try and stop them. It is better to never allow the rolling to begin. You not only have to stand on the log, but you must be able to work other logs at the same time. Frankly, I've never seen a man ride successfully through very rough rapids standing up, but they somehow or other get through by riding the log astride. There were some beginners who wanted to try their skill. When I first started working on the river, one of the foremen told me, you ought to be able to make it the rest of the way. You swam the first 30 miles.
She's pulling. That call meant it was every man for himself. As the jam began to break apart, men scattered back to the safety of the big logs. In the old days, a very important part of the rear crew were the bateau men. They ferried men back and forth across the river. They were stationed below the rapids in case a man fell in or part of a wing jam broke off. The work seemed endless. Many mornings the crew awoke to find the river shut tight with an overnight jam, and again would have to break it. The river carried them on and on, past spruce and spring green aspen into summer. It was about July 15th when the last of the Little Fork River Drive reached the Rainy River in time to be hoisted at Lowman and rail hauled to the sawmill and paper mill at International Falls. The townspeople came out to run the logs from one bank to the other, the old sport of mill towns. The drive was over, and the logs lifted from the mill pond to the mill.
As I listened to the high whine of the saw, I remembered the icy waters of the Little Fork, log drives of years past, and legends created around the campfires. But I will remember most the old log driver lifting his pike pole He pushed it at the passing logs for the very last time.